Cheers, Rockets fans. Welcome to The Logger Line, an exclusive podcast from the home of the Rockets.
Whoa!
Sports Talk 790.
Rockets!
The Logger Line is proudly served to you by Carbox Clutch City Lager.
It is good! Oh, yeah?
Red Nation, get ready. Get ready. The Logger Line starts now.
Welcome aboard.
Welcome back to yet another episode of The Logger Line, as always served to you courtesy of Houston's Carbock Brewing. I'm Ben Dubose, your host, editor of USA Today's Rockets Wire, and contributor to Sports Talk 790, official flagship radio station of your Houston Rockets. We had an episode go live earlier today talking about the Kevin Durant trade negotiations, which appear to be entering their final stages. Rockets certainly still an option for KD and the Suns. Time will tell as to whether they are the team that actually gets his services for next season and potentially beyond. If you want to check out insights on that, just hit up our archives. Today, we've got a second episode because there's some breaking news that actually went live just as I was posting the first podcast, and that's that the Rockets have re-signed or agreed to re-sign veteran center Steven Adams for next season and beyond. It's a 3-year deal worth $39 million, first reported by ESPN's Shams Charania. According to Kelly Iko of The Athletic, there's no player or team options, and the deal is fully guaranteed. So if you are a Logger Line listener, you know that a few days ago we had an episode projecting some of the internal free agency negotiations that the Rockets could have with their own players who could hit the market. And I had guessed that Steven would get somewhere in the ballpark of 3 years, 42 to 45 million, because that's approximately the non-taxpayer MLE. He actually came in a little bit below that. So I think this is a very good deal. It's understandable because with where he is in his career, now 32 years old, or will be, I think, later this summer, he's not someone that has a ton of upside, at least in terms of the 82-game grind. So I don't think you're going to see a young team treat him as a building block type of player. He's someone that fits on a playoff team. So the non-taxpayer mid-level exception, which is about $14-15 million annually, was always going to be the high end of his market. It was also the floor when you consider how good he looked in the playoffs. And so to see him come in a little bit below that, perhaps because in this new collective bargaining agreement era of the NBA, there's more cost pressures than ever before. So maybe teams didn't even have full access, at least not to this stage, to their full non-taxpayer MLE. And the way I'm told it went down, Steven and his agent basically canvassed the league, saw what offers were out there. Of course, they can't officially negotiate, but we know unofficially parameters have been talked about for some time. They went back to the Rockets and basically had this deal, and the Rockets had the choice to, match it or let him go. And obviously they matched it, and he wanted to stay, and he is staying. And for it to be a little bit below the MLE, that's a win. I mean, it's not a massive win to go from 42 to 45 to 39, but look, this is a payroll that, because of the new contracts for Alperen Sengun and Jalen Green, it's escalating. And so the Rockets could be a luxury tax team this year. If they make a big-time trade acquisition, such as Kevin Durant, they might end up being capped at the first apron. There's going to be financial pressures starting this season and only accelerating in the years to come as guys like Jabari Smith, Tari Eason, and Ben Thompson get contract extensions, assuming they all stay on the roster. The payroll is going to get tight. And so every dollar you can save on your veterans is important, especially when so many young guys, starting with Sengun and Jalen Green this coming season, are getting raises. So for Steven to come in below the MLE and his starting salary, we'll see how they structure the deal, it could actually be a decrease compared to last year. That was another reason why I expected a 3-year deal in this range. He played last year, the final year of his previous contract, at $12.6 million. It could be that he actually takes a slight pay decrease this year because, depending on how they structure it, that year one salary could be as low as $12 million. So to see someone who played as well as he did in the playoffs take a slight pay decrease potentially, worst case, it will be about the same. Yeah, that's a huge win because, look, he was, I would argue, one of the 5 most valuable players in a playoff series, a high-leverage 7-game grind in which you had big names all over the place. Steph Curry, Jimmy Butler, Draymond Green, Amen Thompson, Fred VanVleet, Alperen Şengün. I would argue, and I think the stats bear it out, Steven Adams was one of the 5 most valuable players in that series. And to bring him back for below MLE money, and when you consider that the Rockets didn't really have any options to retain him if he went elsewhere, and it was at least a risk. Look, there are some players. I would point to one example, Jonas Valanciunas, a guy who in some ways is analogous to Steven. I don't think he's as good of a player, but similar body type, traditional big man who haven't seemed to care as much about being in a winning environment, and they opt to just go where they can play the most or max out their counting stats, whatever the motivation may be. And I'm not going to blame them because, if they want to play more, I get it. You're not going to hear me criticize anybody that wants to bet on themselves and just play as many minutes as possible while they have this limited window to be a professional athlete at the highest level. So there was always a risk that with Steven, even though clearly he can impact winning in Houston, look, his minutes were always going to be a little bit limited because even if his role can be scaled up, even if they can use double big at times, look, he is the backup behind Alperen Şengün, who was an all-star last year and is just 22 years old. It would not have been unfathomable for Steven to go to a place where he could be the starter. He could get a little bit more of the limelight. The Lakers need a starting center. My God, would he be a huge upgrade there? And yeah, there are some other scenarios. Steven could have played this until closer to the start of free agency and seen if someone eventually could have gotten more money. He could have, knowing the Rockets had bird rights, perhaps asked them to pay a premium to outbid whatever the external offers are because they're asking him to take a little bit of a lesser role. But to his credit, he didn't. He wanted to stay. I'm sure he wanted the security to get done as soon as possible after going through the injury hell that he's gone through the last couple of years. And, even if we thought based on, all the interviews we've done with Steven this year, and those of you listening have seen, he's never seemed like a guy who necessarily wants the spotlight, but you can't rule it out. And these guys enter free agency knowing that they don't have too many years as unrestricted free agents in their primes. And so if you followed the NBA for any length of time, you know that you shouldn't rule anything out and things can get unpredictable. So for the Rockets to be able to bring him back on a reasonable deal, I mean, it's very good to keep the rotation core of a 52 and 30 team that finished number 2 in the West together. But beyond that, it really mitigates the downside scenario because they retained him with bird rights. If you had let Steven go, a guy who was undisputably one of the 5 best players in a playoff series, the most you could have cobbled together, because the payroll is increasing as is, would have been MLE money. We talked about someone like Brook Lopez as a backup plan. I don't think Brook Lopez is quite as impactful as Steven Adams, and he's also 37 years old. And I'm not even sure the Rockets would have had the money to do that. I guess you could have combined the expiring salaries of Jock Landale and Aaron Holiday to try and bring in someone that way. But number one, you'd be taking them out of play for any bigger deals like Kevin Durant if you do that. And secondly, I'm not sure a player of that salary range that you could conceivably get for expiring contracts would be anywhere near as impactful as Steven Adams. The bottom line is, if Steven had left, you did not have any realistic way to bring in a player comparable to him in total value. The only way you could have is if you had, traded significant value, i.e. young players or future draft assets. And in that scenario, you're sort of, harming your future options, because rather than just doing an add-on, which Steven is, Rafael Stone, GM of the Rockets, did a great deal when Steven was injured in the 23 to 24 season to bring him in at the deadline for basically 2 second-round picks. And so he was basically an add-on to the current core. If you had to dip into your war chest of either young players or draft picks to replace him, then that would have been a hit to some of the bigger options you potentially have down the line. So even if we were all optimistic that Steven would stay, and the Rockets said after the season that all indications they had were that he liked being here, and obviously they had bird rights, look, until a deal was reached, you had to worry at least a little bit, because there was no easy way to replace him. So beyond the money being good for his production, it's also a huge sigh of relief, because the Rockets would not have very easily been able to replace his level of production. And to do so would have significantly harmed your optionality to do other deals in the future. So this deal is a big win. And I actually think it's very interesting in terms of what it means for the rest of the offseason. A lot of times when you bring back a key rotation player, the takeaway is, oh, the team is running it back, that it's the status quo. And if that ends up being the case, again, that's fine. Rockets 52-30, very young team, number 2 in the West. There's nothing wrong with staying the course. But I actually think this opens up more options. I think in terms of especially bigger moves, someone like a Kevin Durant or a Giannis or anyone else that might hit the market, the Rockets are more likely to go after those types of players with Steven Adams in the fold than they were if he had left. And saving a little bit of money relative to the MLE and maybe relative to last year's salary, that helps a little bit when it comes to filling out the roster. But the bigger thing, the Rockets are very aware of the concept of windows. And I've talked about it in recent pods, with this being why the Rockets would not use Fred VanVleet as matching salary in a Kevin Durant deal. The Rockets do not feel that they are good enough for a major move to be worth it if Fred isn't on the team. Hence, he's staying, and they'll probably negotiate his deal at a lower figure. Time will tell as to what that is. You can check out that recent pod we had if you want my speculation on that. But where this fits in with Steven, because you bring back a very good player and on a very good contract as well, the Rockets still have a path to actually contend for a championship next year. So they are going to be more likely to explore the market for the types of big name trades or additions that can take them to that next tier. If you had lost Steven Adams and had to replace him, go bargain basement shopping, I guess, you would have seen the Rockets, in my opinion, take a longer term view with their timeline, because the championship window, there wouldn't have been a realistic path, at least not next season and probably not 2 years from now, without Steven Adams. Not saying that Steven Adams alone makes you a contender. Let's not get crazy. But what I'm saying is that retaining his skill set, just like retaining Fred VanVleet, is important to the Rockets being close enough for that window to potentially be open and for it to be worthwhile to bring in a KD or a Giannis. That's not me saying they're going to do it. But I do think that while on some level the reaction is going to be, oh, this is great, let's, keep the band together. There's going to be some of that, and that's fair. You can certainly argue for that. But I don't think you should take it as an indication that that's what the Rockets are going to do. They might. But I also think that bringing back Steven gives them optionality to push in their chips sooner, because with Fred and with Steven, those are the types of veterans that have you close enough that, hey, if you can bring in a Kevin Durant to supplement most of the young core, which would be staying, you might could actually make a legitimate run a year from now. So that's just something to think about. Steven Adams on a reasonable deal, it's good on a number of levels, but it also keeps your options open for something bigger this offseason if the right deal materializes. Now, the last thing I'll say, so Steven's market was interesting, and even though in the regular season the counting stats weren't there, it was his first year back from knee surgery, and he had always called it a 2-year recovery process. So in the regular season, he only played in 58 of 82 games. Early in the year, he was on minutes restrictions, didn't play on both ends of back-to-backs, and he only averaged a little over 13 minutes per game. So 58 games, average of 13 minutes per game, and he wasn't quite himself early in the year, working his way back to health. And so you can argue, and there's some truth in this, that not only are the Rockets bringing back a guy who was so critical in the playoffs, but that actually Steven Adams in 25-26, there's some untapped potential in terms of what it means for your regular season success, because he didn't do all that much in the regular season last year, in large part because of the restrictions. And so now, conceivably, you could double his minutes. I don't think you'd expect him to play 26 minutes per game, but if he plays, closer to 70 games than 58 and maybe 20 minutes per game rather than 13, there's a world where his overall minutes played in the regular season could come close to doubling from last year. And based on how good he was in the playoffs, that could be, a little thing that could further boost your chances next season, along with, the obvious factors such as the continued development of your young players. There is some truth in that. However, I would caution, I think both the Rockets and Steven, even if he's fully cleared medically, are going to be very cognizant of the concept of mileage. He's a very large human being who's played more than a decade in the NBA. I think he's going to be load managed. Even if he plays, I don't know if he'll go all out. Like a good example, what started to open my eyes to the possibility of playoff Steven Adams, at the beginning of January, there was this game against the Lakers in which he just went off. He dominated. And this was before the Luka trade. So the Lakers had LeBron and AD. And AD was helpless trying to keep him off the offensive glass. That was something that suggested to me. And if you recall, the Rockets at the time were on a losing streak. They had just lost Jabari Smith to the broken hand that was going to keep him out for 6+ weeks. Vibes were low. It was a high-profile matchup with the Lakers in town, the only time the Lakers visited Toyota Center all year. And Steven Adams turned it up. And that sort of told me, hey, he's got this gear that hasn't fully been unleashed. And then in the playoffs, we saw that much more consistently. And we saw it down the stretch of the year when the Rockets went to double big. And there were some things that the combination of Steven and Şengün unlocked. I do think some of the subpar production, not bad production, but just not at playoff level during the regular season, was both the Rockets and Steven load managing him, not just because of the injury, but just the nature of his game, how physical it is, the mileage over more than a decade in the NBA, and saying, hey, we want to make sure that you can tap into the peak version of yourself come April and May. And to their credit, it worked out. And I think that's somewhat going to happen again next year. There might not be any technical back-to-back or minutes restrictions, but both in terms of how many minutes the Rockets play him and how hard Steven goes in those minutes. He'll still be good, don't get me wrong. He's someone that, the basic points and rebounds, the basic box score stats will never tell the story. It's about how he impacts winning. It's about the rebounding presence and how he just clears off an entire side of the court. It's about the screen setting. It's about the little things. Steven Adams is not a stats player. He's a winning player. To some extent, that's always going to be there. But in terms of how insanely hard he played in the playoffs on top of it, to where there were times he was just gassed. I mean, he emptied the tank in some of those games against the Warriors. I don't know if we'll see that version for like double the minutes in the regular season. So I would just caution everyone a little bit to pump the brakes on that. You'll see a little bit of an improvement in terms of his overall production, his minutes, assuming he's cleared, which I have no reason to think that he won't be 2 years after knee surgery. But given his style of play, given his age, I think they'll be cognizant of managing his load and keeping it to where he isn't tapped out by the time April and May come around. Above all else, this is a playoff signing. And that's where Steven's going to have the most value. And to, bring the episode full circle, mini episode, because I'm about to wrap up. God, we've had more than an hour's worth of content today. It's that playoff upside that you get from bringing back Steven that makes the remainder of the offseason so intriguing. Because now that you are bringing back the full rotation from last year, and Steven should be healthier, and perhaps even at a lower salary figure, that it makes it all the more tempting if the right guy comes available at the right price to maybe push your chips in and say, hey, next year is one in which we can do a Western Conference version of Indiana and have everything come together a bit sooner than the outside world thinks. Not saying for sure it's going to happen, but bringing back Steven is the kind of move that can push you a little bit more in that direction if you're on the fence. Anyway, that'll do it for this episode and hopefully for today. Now, if the Rockets swing a KD trade or something crazy like that happens, of course, I'll have another show, but hopefully that'll be at least a day or two away to give me time to breathe. And of course, we'll do a full show with Paolo Alves, who I haven't had on the last few weeks. He's been busy, but he's chomping at the bit to return. So we'll get him in on the KD trade, whether it's to the Rockets or someone else. And also some draft talk. If the Rockets don't make the KD trade, then it's at least a little more likely that they either keep the pick or stay in the draft. Haven't done a lot of talk on that because we're waiting to see what happens with KD first. Well, one way or another, we'll have some resolution, it sounds like, in the next few days. For the reasons in the timetable, check out the KD episode in today's archives, and you can find out why. But yeah, we will have more content in the near future. Hopefully, this will do it for a busy Saturday, June 14th. And if you want more content before our next show, which, again, hopefully we'll have at least a couple of days to let things breathe, but who knows? It's the crazy time of the year in the NBA. But if you want more content before that next show, best place to get it is on social media. You can follow me on Blue Sky at Ben Dubose. You can follow this show and the Rockets Wire. I'm the editor of USA Today's Rockets blog. You can follow both on Twitter/X at The Logger Line for the show and the Rockets Wire for the USA Today blog. And then if you go to the Logger Line, you hit the link tree, you can find links to, obviously, distribution partners, Apple, Google, Spotify. Please subscribe, leave a positive review. That's how we can look good to our friends, partners, and sponsors, whose links, by the way, are in that same link tree. USA Today's Rockets Wire, Karbach Brewing, Sports Talk 790. Again, you know the idea by now. Consume their content so that we can look good to those partners, to those sponsors, and keep this program running as one of the most active podcasts covering Houston Rockets basketball. All right, to wrap up a busy multi-episode June 14th, this is where we will finally adjourn, hopefully for good, at least for a day. But stay tuned, because it's the NBA offseason. It's going to be crazy, and the Rockets are in the conversation for some pretty big moves. Until next time, this is where we break. Again, I'm Ben Dubose. Appreciate you guys so much for tuning in, and please come back soon for more new episodes from the Logger Line.